A flood of Chinese citizens, rich, middle class, and poor, are risking their lives and spending exorbitant sums to escape China and cross illegally into nations with better living conditions like the United States or Vietnam. This mass exodus of Chinese migrants has rapidly accelerated in recent months as Xi Jinping's authoritarian rule has pushed thousands to flee China by any means possible. All will be covered today in China Undercover. You find our information helpful, please subscribe and turn on the notification. This old woman is trying to sneak across the border to the United States. These Chinese people are crossing to U.S. border in Mexico. Faced with deepening repression and vanishing economic prospects, many people saw no future for themselves in Xi's China. In increasing numbers, they are escaping abroad. As of September 30, 2022, the number of Chinese immigrants in the United States was under 2.4 million. According to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, 4,366 migrants from China encountered Border Patrol officials after crossing the southern border without authorization from October 2022 to February 2023. Most asylum seekers and visa applicants come from China's educated urban middle class. But the lengthy visa process and frequent rejections are driving more to pursue illegal migration. Smuggling networks offer Chinese citizens entry into countries like the United States for fees of up to $50,000. The most desperate try their luck crossing the treacherous Darien Gap jungle between Colombia and Panama, one of the world's most dangerous migrant routes. The number of Chinese nationals traversing the lawless, roadless Darien Gap more than doubled from 2021 to 2022, hitting a record 3,500 crossings. On the Colombian side of the Darien jungle, The Guardian met dozens of Chinese migrants in the border town of Necoclí. They were planning to hike 60 miles through snake and spider-infested jungle, risking injury, disease, robbery, and sexual assault to reach Panama, the gateway to the United States. Not only the U.S., but Vietnam is also the destination of most Chinese. As China faces historic unemployment crisis, Vietnam emerges as economic powerhouse. Without jobs or hopes of re-employment at home, more than 1.3 million Chinese citizens are opting to migrate to neighboring Vietnam. Many will not return. Every day, thousands with little but the shirts on their backs queue up at border crossings, like the Friendship Gate between Guangxi and Vietnam. The lines stretch for miles, taking days to process through. But word has spread across China's cities and villages that Vietnam holds promise of a new life. Over the past decade, Vietnam has positioned itself as the world's newest manufacturing powerhouse. As China's competitiveness wanes amid rising protectionism, companies are rapidly relocating to Vietnam. Intel, Samsung, Apple, LG, Foxconn, and Luxshare are among the giants expanding operations in Vietnam. Chinese firms like Huawei, Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo are following suit. Vietnam now rivals China in exporting electronics, apparel, and machinery to developed markets. Not to mention, labor unions are integral in Vietnam and possess real power to organize collectively. More importantly, workers can form self-directed unions even without official approval. Unions have successfully won higher wages, improved safety, and compensation for aggrieved workers at foreign-invested facilities. And authorities have strengthened penalties for employers that violate labor regulations. Contrast this with China, where independent unions are non-existent, and the state-backed After-Hours Union offers negligible support for workers. Exploitative labor practices are commonplace among firms in China, going unpunished by local authorities whose priorities align more with owners rather than employees. For migrant workers abused in cities far from home, there is minimal recourse. So why they are fleeing? The first is to escape evil policies. Chinese asylum seekers cite repression under Xi Jinping as their motivation for abandoning their country. But most point to China's harsh zero-COVID policies as the immediate trigger. When COVID emerged in Wuhan in late 2019, the Chinese government imposed stringent lockdowns and restrictions to eliminate the virus. Xi declared zero-COVID the only acceptable pandemic strategy. While other countries eventually eased controls and reopened, China's remained in place well into 2022. Tens of millions were confined to their homes for months, allowed out only for mandatory COVID tests. Entire neighborhoods were forcibly quarantined over a handful of cases. Children were separated from parents if one family member tested positive. Food and medical care became difficult to access. Volunteer groups formed to keep locked-down residents fed. Videos circulated of people screaming from high-rise windows for help. Still, China's fugitives prefer the uncertainty of detention camps and lengthy asylum processes abroad over the grim certainty of repression in their homeland. The second is economy migrate, and at that time this uncertainty was more pronounced than among Chinese youth and graduates. Despite having higher education levels, their economic prospects have paradoxically worsened. Youth unemployment in cities has hit record levels, 46.5 for those aged 16 to 24. With cutthroat competition for limited white-collar jobs, graduates face years of instability. Many become Ken Lao Zu, literally meaning those who gnaw on the old O, relying on parents for financial support well into their 30s and 40s. With no state welfare or unemployment benefits, they have little savings or safety net. The twin pressures of living costs and bleak job markets have made emigration an alluring option. When China suddenly lifted most pandemic controls in December 2022, it unleashed a tidal wave of outgoing travel. On the day borders reopened, flight searches for destinations like the US, Australia, and Thailand skyrocketed. But even as travel resumed, the legacy of repression and economic ruin endured. Many who had lost livelihoods and life savings during lockdown found themselves impoverished and in debt, and the constant threat of disappearing into detention camps still loomed large in Xinjiang and other minority regions. So, now on temporary U.S. visas, Chinese asylum seekers still fear political persecution if forced to return home. Some suspect police pressure caused relatives back in China to break ties, likely to compel their return. With nothing left for them in China, asylum seekers pin their hopes on gaining refugee status abroad. But the odds are increasingly long. U.S. asylum approval rates for Chinese nationals have fallen from over 90 to below 20 in the past decade as application numbers climbed. Wait times now stretch well over 5 years. The third is seeking freedom. Beyond just economic factors, China's growing authoritarianism has also created a sense of unease, especially among intellectuals, academics, and activists. The space for free expression and civil liberties has shrunk. Those seen as overly critical of the establishment can face harassment, censorship, or arrest. The state regulates everything from social media apps to religious activity. Surveillance cameras powered by advanced facial recognition track citizens' everyday activities. Xinjiang and Tibet remain restive, with harsh policies against Uyghur Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists. Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms have been eroded after protests were quelled. Within the country, there is little room to evade pervasive control and scrutiny. Those yearning for more freedoms, whether political, religious, or social, feel stifled. For liberals, ethnic minorities, and marginalized groups, emigration seems the only path forward. Routes of escape. As Chinese migration accelerates, complex human smuggling networks have evolved to facilitate irregular journeys abroad. Agents shepherd clients along high-risk routes through the Americas or Africa towards final destinations like the US or Europe. Online groups on WeChat and QQ Coach would be asylum seekers on applying for visas and entering desired countries. Travel agents book discounted flights and tours meant as cover for reaching intermediary countries. Chat groups then connect migrants with local smugglers to cross borders illegally. A typical route starts with a flight into countries like Turkey or Ecuador that allow visa-free entry for Chinese citizens. From there, travelers move overland through Latin America towards Mexico and the U.S. border. Popular but dangerous land crossings include the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, infested with snakes, disease, and paramilitary gangs. Another is the deadly crossing into the United States across the Arizona desert. The journey can span weeks in rickety trucks, boats, and jungle hikes guided by smugglers. Migrants face constant dangers of robbery, kidnapping, sexual assault, injury, and death, especially for female travelers. As for Vietnam, some routes include northern land border crossing. Many Chinese migrants cross illegally into northern Vietnam by foot or vehicles via porous border areas like those between Guangxi, China, and Lang Son, Cao Bang, Quang Ninh provinces in Vietnam. This avoids land and sea immigration checkpoints. River crossing. Some migrants pay smugglers to take them across border rivers like the Ma River near Dien Bien Phu using small boats, rafts, or inflatables. Routes frequently shift to avoid authorities. Underground tunnels. Smugglers guide migrants through secret tunnels under the mountainous terrain between China and Vietnam to bypass border control. Tunnels run from Guangxi to Lang Son and Cao Bang. Sea routes. Chinese boats illegally ferry migrants from China's Hainan Island or Guangdong province into central Vietnamese coastal cities like Da Nang, avoiding port immigration. Container ships stowing away and shipping container cargo from China's ports to Ho Chi Minh City, Vung To or Haiphong ports in Vietnam. Highly dangerous, fake documents. Some Chinese enter Vietnam legally by air or land with fake Vietnamese IDs. Work permits or travel papers prepared by smugglers. Overstaying visas. Coming to Vietnam as a tourist or on other short-term visas, and then overstaying illegally after expiry. Cost of escape. Hiring snakeheads and Chinese smugglers to evade border controls is an expensive proposition that can cost tens of thousands of dollars per person. Fees rise as global migration enforcement tightens and routes grow more hazardous and circuitous. According to Chinese agents, the journey from China to the U.S. border via South America now runs between $20,000 to $50,000 per adult. Family packages are offered with discounts for children. The price includes counterfeit passports and visas, plane tickets on airlines like Turkish Airlines, accommodation, intra-country transport, and bribes to Colombian immigration agents to bypass passport checks. The final payment is made to local coyotes to guide migrants through the perilous 100-kilometer Darien jungle crossing into Panama. From there, Chinese travelers can reach Mexico by plane to find new coyote guides who lead them to the U.S. border. Alternative land routes through Africa and South Asia can cost over $20,000. Flying into Mexico or Central America is cheaper but riskier, requiring $5,000 to $20,000 to arrange fake tourism visas and flights. The costs for Chinese citizens to illegally migrate to Vietnam can also vary greatly depending on the method used and the services of smugglers. Despite being cheaper compared to the U.S. routes, it can still cost a fortune. Some estimates on common routes. Border crossing. $300 $500 per person paid to smugglers for help crossing remote northern border areas on foot or by vehicle while avoiding border guards. River crossing. $500 $800 to be taken across border rivers at night using small boats while dodging patrols. Border tunnels. Around $1,000 $2,000 to be guided through secret underground tunnels between Vietnam and China. Fraudulent documents. Fake Vietnamese IDs or work permits can cost $2,000 to $5,000 per document set, depending on quality and level of forgery. Sham marriages. Arranged marriages of convenience to Vietnamese citizens for residency permits could cost up to $10,000. Smuggling by boat, $5,000 to $8,000 per person to be smuggled from China to Vietnam by sea routes on small vessels. Container shipping, paying smugglers $10,000 or more to be hidden in cargo containers from China to Vietnam's ports. Very high risk. Hiring snakeheads. Chinese smuggling gangs called snakeheads charge each migrant $10,000 to $30,000 for guaranteed entry with fake papers, transportation, housing, and jobs. Other costs can include bribes to border guards, accommodation en route, and living costs after arriving illegally in Vietnam. But the lack of legal options and demand drive many Chinese migrants to risk these illegal pathways. In conclusion, when Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, few expected the harsh authoritarian turn he would take. But over the past decade, Xi has steadily consolidated power, purging rivals and dissenters. He removed term limits on the presidency, allowing him to rule indefinitely. The Chinese state under Xi has cracked down viciously on any perceived threats to its power. Over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in re-education camps in Xinjiang. Pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong were quashed with a draconian national security law. Elected opposition lawmakers were ejected from Hong Kong's legislature. And Beijing has intensified its threats against democratic Taiwan. Xi's crackdown reached a new level in 2022 as Chinese authorities imposed draconian lockdowns across the country in pursuit of a zero-COVID policy. These lockdowns confined hundreds of millions to their homes for months, crippled small businesses, separated families, and caused economic chaos. When angry citizens in Shanghai and other cities protested the harsh measures, they were brutally suppressed. The human impact was devastating. Unemployment skyrocketed, especially among youth. Access to healthcare and other vital services was severely disrupted. Public frustration boiled over into rare protests denouncing Xi Jinping as a dictator and the Communist Party as corrupt. From that reason alone, surely anyone would want to find a better place to live. Let's hope for a brighter future for the Chinese citizens. And that is today's episode. If you found this video informative, please subscribe and ring a bell to get notification. Thank you for watching and see you next time.